The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show. I apologize. I was doing the other show, and my computer crashed again. So, fourth time in 4 tries. It crashed twice earlier this week, and then we had a power outage the third time, and today it crashed again, this time 18 minutes into the show, right at the beginning. So, this just sucks. So I'm going to have to figure out a solution on my computer to doing this. I'm not going to do the show I intended to do, which was the critique of the debate, because I don't want to I got 18 minutes into it, and it's useless now because of the crash, and I can't, who knows how long it'll crash. This is not, I don't think it's a new computer. The computer is a powerful computer. I think it's this new operating system. I upgraded the operating system on the Mac, and since then it's been a disaster. So don't upgrade unless you have to. So I'm going to have to figure out how to downgrade my operating system to the previous version on a Mac. And that's what I'm going to try to do before the next show, because I'll do that over the weekend. I was hoping, I ran all kinds of maintenance, I cleaned the drive, I did all this stuff, and hoping that would do it, but it didn't. So anyway, I don't want to do a show where I get into one topic and it's just trash if the computer crashes. So what I'm going to do is we'll do this is an open Q&A. So feel free to use the super chat to ask any questions about anything you want, try to bring in a bunch of different things. Doesn't have to be about politics. It can be about personal morality. It can be about self-help. It can be about sex, love, romance. It can be about any cultural phenomena out there that you want. You can ask about anything. There's the super chat feature. Use it. I've got about 5 questions from earlier that I can use, and I will I will do that, and we'll go from there, and hopefully by the time of the next show I'll have this problem fixed, because it is really pissing me off royally, because I get into it. I was all into Varoufakis. I was all into really doing this debate and going after the Brooks brothers, Arthur and David. They're not brothers, by the way, but they both have the same name and they have very similar views. And anyway, let's do some of this. Let's do some super chat questions. All right, so Jason asked if his 4 super chat questions before the computer crash will be answered. Yes, they will be all answered. So we will start with the first one. I don't know which ones are yours, but if they're not, then just ping me on the chat here and let me know that there are others. Is the sudden rise in tribalism a result of our mixed economy being on the verge of collapse? Yes, there's a sense in which that is the case, that we're running the course on a mixed economy. And, this is not, and it's not the mixed economy per se. It's what I would say is we're running the course on the lack of ideas, on the impotence of our intellectuals, on the impotence of explanations by economists, by thinkers, by intellectuals, by our politicians, by the leadership. There's a reason why everybody right now hates the so-called elites, particularly on the right. Because the elites have betrayed America. They betrayed the people. The elites are basically promised that the mixed economy will solve everything, that the mixed economy will solve poverty. We've had a war on poverty since the 1960s. Right? What's that? That's a long time. That's 50 years. We've had a war on poverty. Has it done anything? No. We'd have warred drugs for about 50 years. Hasn't done anything. People are still dying out there from the drug war. And people are still using drugs with no end. We've had promises after promises that that prosperity will increase forever. And it is slowly increasing forever. But many people are not feeling it because many people are stuck. Social mobility, economic mobility in the United States is stuck. Entrepreneurship is at relative lows. There's a glut of savings in the world with little investment opportunities because there's a shortage of good investments, which means there's a shortage of entrepreneurs. Right? So there are real problems out there. There are people who are stuck in poverty in spite of the war on poverty. Our children are getting awful education, and we're told by the experts, oh, we're going to fix it. We're going to spend more money. We're going to pay teachers more. Oh, we've got the latest, greatest academic research about how to teach people how to read or how to do math. Oh, no. We're going to open charter schools. That'll solve the problem. And it doesn't. It doesn't. It just goes on and on and on. We constantly are immersed in this horrible situation in which we've made promises, they don't come true, and then nobody explains it. We go through a financial crisis. And there is, we go through a financial crisis, and people really suffer. People lose a lot of money. People lose their jobs. For a while there, it looked really, really, really bad. Banks are bailed out. People are not. And of course, the financial crisis is blamed on capitalism, and everybody goes, oh, this is capitalism. I don't want capitalism. So the mixed economy is failing, and yet there are no alternatives presented. Socialism, nobody wants socialism. Nobody really buys into socialism. Even the young people who claim to be for socialism, when you actually ask them about the details of what socialism looks like, they don't want socialism. They want Scandinavia. Well, but Scandinavia is poorer than America. Scandinavia has less opportunities than America. Scandinavia is less vibrant than America. They don't really want Scandinavia. They want what they imagine Scandinavia to be. So, you've got a situation where there are no ideas, where there are real problems and no ideas. And politics has deteriorated into Donald Trump versus Nancy Pelosi. And partisanship and pure partisanship, where everybody only cares about what tribe you belong to. And people are afraid, and people don't understand, and people don't know. And again, the educational system has betrayed them completely and thoroughly, so that they have no foundations to critique what is going on, to understand what is going on, to imagine options for what's going on. And we've, in some way, lobotomized them. Thinking doesn't help. All these intellectuals think, and they have no solutions. They have no ideas. All these economists put together models of sophisticated stuff that have nothing to do with reality. So what's thinking worth? Well, if thinking's gone, if thinking's no good, if thinking can't solve our problems, because nobody seems to be thinking, and the people who seem to be thinking mouth nonsense, then what am I left with? Well, I'm left with emotions. And where do emotions lead me? Well, if my reason is incompetent, if I can't really think, can't really solve problems, if the facts are not there, if I don't know what the facts, if I don't understand the world, then I've said this many times, the emotion that evokes is fear. And when you're afraid, you look for like people who look like you, people who think like you, people who are like you, come from the same culture, and you hang out with them. and you listen to them, and you feed off of them, and they feed off of you. But at the end of the day, you, this group, this tribe, doesn't know what to do either. It's still just a bunch of people who are afraid, who are sticking together because you all look the same, or they come from the same culture, or you have the same emotions. So you gotta get somebody to manage this group, somebody to tell this group what to do. You gotta get an authoritarian. So tribalism is a consequence of the mixed economy of ideas, the mixed economy of the soul, which leads to the mixed economy in economics, which leads to frustration, alienation, depression, fear, which leads to tribalism, which leads to authoritarianism. And that is the projection of Western civilization. And it comes for, as Leonard Peikoff describes in Dim, a disintegration of our capacity to think. A disintegration. And how disintegration, again, you can't understand the world if you're disintegrated, if you're not integrating, if you're not, what makes us, one of the things that makes us human, what is interesting about a key feature of human reason is our ability to integrate, to see bigger ideas, bigger generalizations. The whole way in which we conceptualize is by integrating and creating more and more abstract ideas. If you break that, if you question that, if you destroy that, then what you get is the unhuman. What you get is the fearful. What you get is the emotional. What you get is tribalism. It's inevitable. All right. We got a lot of questions. Good. So that's question number one. What do you make of Blake Scholes' progress on his supersonic aircraft? For those of you who don't know, Blake Scholes is an entrepreneur, a big Ayn Rand fan, and self-identified objectivist who launched a startup that is developing a supersonic aircraft and is going and is fairly far along in designing one, ultimately building a test aircraft, testing it, and then making it commercial, selling it to airlines, or being bought out by a Boeing or somebody like that, who will then sell it to airlines. I haven't kept track, so I'm probably about a year behind, or maybe 6 months behind, but last I saw, it was pretty amazing. They were making real progress. I don't want to be skeptical, but I just have to be. I'll believe it when I see it in terms of getting through all the regulatory hoops and getting through, and getting flight plans approved by the regulators and actually having airports approve landing and takeoff and all of that. But it looks very promising. And indeed, there's competition now in the space. There are a number of companies now that are trying to develop supersonic jets. And hey, I will be one of the first people on them because I fly a huge amount. And a supersonic jet that can cut my commute time dramatically by 30%, sometimes 50%, is going to be a huge boon to my life. So I'm a huge fan of supersonic jets and hope Blake is successful and becomes a billionaire and does incredibly well. And I get to fly in the planes, right? I'm selfish after all. Is there a link between narcissism and nihilism? Probably. I'm sure there's a link between them. Both involve a rejection of reason. Both, in sense, involve a rejection of self-esteem. Both lack self-esteem. Now, narcissism you would think have self-esteem, right? Because it's about me, 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 me. But they don't. The reason it's about me, 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 and how I look to other people and how they're worshiping me, is that I don't have self-esteem. So narcissists get offended easily. Narcissists lash back at people who say things they don't like. Narcissists have no ability to control their emotions, particularly their anger. Narcissists are constantly concerned about how other people think of them. Narcissists have no interest in the truth, in reality, in fact, only in how things reflect on them and on other people's perception of them. So narcissists are very much second-handers. Narcissists don't have any self-esteem. They don't really love themselves. If they loved themselves, they wouldn't care what other people thought of them. They wouldn't care how they looked to other people. They wouldn't obsess about themselves. They'd obsess about how to attain happiness, which involves interacting with other people, treating other people well, and not caring about criticism. Criticism, this is my shtick on criticism. Somebody criticizes you. There are two possibilities. They're either right or they're wrong. If they're right, then the proper response to such criticism is gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for showing me a truth about myself. Thank you for helping me make myself better. Thank you for showing me a truth in the world out there that I was wrong about, that I didn't recognize. So the appropriate response, take that off, to criticism when it's true is gratitude. What is the appropriate response to criticism when it's false? It's to ignore it. Why does it matter? Who cares? If somebody is spouting lies, that's their problem. It's their fault. Now, you have to defend yourself to the extent that it's relevant to defend yourself. But somebody is saying something that's untrue is on them. They're the ones who are wrong. Just ignore them. Or defend yourself, but ignore them. And you don't have to become emotional in defending yourself, because you're right and they're wrong. So why get emotional? So narcissists lack self-esteem. They're not focused on truth. They're not focused on reality. And they're not focused on value. Not if value means that which enhances life, that which is necessary for the survival and the thriving and the happiness of a human being, because they're not interested in happiness. They're not focused on happiness. They're not focused on thriving and surviving. They're focused on, do I look good to other people? Which is irrelevant to surviving and thriving and succeeding and being happy, properly being happy. I mean, you can see this, and I hate to bring politics into this, you can see this in Donald Trump, who is a complete narcissist. I mean, you could see it in the debates. When anybody criticized him, he would go after them. She's ugly. His father was a Cuban spy or whatever. He'd make stuff up. Then he got crazy and he got angry and he got, that's exactly the mentality of somebody with no self-esteem, who is a complete narcissist. He's constantly obsessed by how many people were in their inauguration, how many people like him, how is he doing in the polls, how is other people see him. That's his complete obsession. That's what he's focusing on. That's an example of narcissism. And it's an example of lack of self-esteem. Now, what about a nihilist? A nihilist is somebody who rejects values, rejects happiness, rejects success in this life, indeed rejects life, rejects the possibility, the value of pursuing life. A narcissist wants to destroy. He's motivated by hate. He's motivated by an emotion. He has no self-esteem. He is not about loving himself and caring about himself and wanting to be happy and be successful. He rejects, on principle, the idea of success. And he is completely dependent on other people because he has rejected himself. So, like a narcissist, he's given up on life, his life. He's given up on happiness. And importantly, he's given up on values and the pursuit of values. And that is the key. The key to life. The key to life is the pursuit of values. You should ask me about that in the super chat. You should ask me about values. And both the narcissist and the nihilist have given up on values, are not pursuing values, are not pursuing life, are not pursuing anything positive. And in that sense, they're very similar. And I think most narcissists are somewhat nihilistic, and most nihilists are somewhat narcissistic. They both involve pleasure, the pleasure of destruction, the pleasure of other people liking you, a superficial pleasure, a fleeting pleasure, a pleasure that's life-destroying, a pleasure that is derived from a sick psychology. A pleasure that is derived from a sick psychology. So yeah, they're very similar psychologically. They're very similar in what they reject philosophically. And neither one of them has a philosophy. There's no philosophy of nihilism. There's no philosophy of narcissism. It's the absence of philosophy. It's the absence of ideas. It's the absence of principle. And it's pseudo-philosophy. It's the garbage like the BAP, the Bronze Age pervert spouts out. It's not ideas. It's feelings. It's emotions. Primarily hatred. Primarily hate. So neither one are philosophy per se. What do you say to the claim no one is an island? Well, you can be an island. It's not like no one metaphysically is an island, right? You can go off. You can live in the wilderness by yourself. It sucks. It's no good. I mean, I would change the phrase to say no one should be an island. No one should want to be an island. There is no value really in being an island as long as there's civilization. Because this, and the answer to that is, yeah, nobody wants to be an island. Individualism is not about being an island. Individualism is about trading. Individualism is about maximizing the number of win-win relationships you can have in life. It's about creating win-win relationships with your wife, with your family, with your neighbors, if you can, if you want to, with people you trade with professionally, with your friends, with your grocery store, with Apple. I'm so angry with Apple right now. But anyway, you want to create right now. It's not a win on my side. This software upgrade has screwed me over. So, of course, you shouldn't want to live on an island. I mean, human beings have immense value to each other. But that doesn't mean I should sacrifice for you. That doesn't mean I should give my life for you. That doesn't mean I should give up my values for you, my happiness for you. That means I should seek out the best in you and try to trade my best for your best. It means we should treat each other as human beings, as equal in rights, as equal in hopefully willingness to trade. But not that I should sacrifice. Not that I should live for you. Not that I should even necessarily help every single one of you. Help the ones I want to help. Help the ones that ultimately I think it's in my self-interest to help. Why does that contradict the idea that we do not want to live on an island? I don't want to live on an island. No objectivist wants to live on an island. No objectivist wants to live free of society. No objectivist wants to live separate of civilization. Quite the contrary. Ayn Rand discusses this extensively. The benefits of civilization, the benefits of society are massive. That's why we better get it right. Because we need to live with other people. It's important for us to live with other people. And what is the danger of living with other people? Well, that they will attack us, that they will use force against us. History is full of that. That's the reason that we need a government. The reason that we need a government and we need the idea and the concept of individual rights is so that the government can protect our rights. In other words, can protect our freedoms, can protect us from those bad guys who might want to impose their will on us by force. That's the purpose of government. It's so we don't have to live on islands. So we can live in a society, but do it selfishly. Not as sacrificial lambs, but as individual, prospering individuals, pursuing our own happiness, independent on one another, yet dependent on one another in the sense of traders being dependent on one another. By the way, I live on an island. I don't know if you know that. Island is Puerto Rico. But I don't live alone on an island. I enjoy the fact that I live with people who, for example, make great food, build beautiful buildings, build the roads, sell me a car, sell me food. I love being in a society. Is it moral to abandon your children if you don't feel like raising them? Are their needs a claim on you? Yes. Their needs are absolutely a claim on you. Because you chose to have them. You chose to have them. They didn't ask to come into this world. You brought them into this world. And by bringing them into this world, you took on a massive responsibility. This is why only have kids if you really want them. Because you take on a massive responsibility. It's like you signed a contract. It's a long-term contract. It's a contract for 18 years that binds you both financially and time-wise, that commits you to helping these children grow up to be productive adults, commits you to providing them with the education, with the means, with the food, with the roof over their head, so that they can grow up to be productive adults and pursue their own happiness. You're committed to giving them those tools. They have a claim against you because you brought them into this world. That is the claim, and it's a legit claim. So you owe your kids until they're adults. You owe them. You owe them food, you owe them shelter, you owe them decent treatment. I can't force you to love them. I wish you'd love them, but you should treat them well. You owe them education. You owe them to train their mind so that they can live successful lives as adults. They didn't ask to come into this world. This is one of the many reasons I support abortion. It's because you should have every opportunity in the world to give up before they become children, before they're born, to change your mind. If you cannot provide those things, don't have kids. If you're not willing to put the time in, don't have kids. If you're not willing to put the money in, don't have kids. And it's better to have an abortion than to have kids you don't want. Much better to have an abortion. It's indeed immoral not to have an abortion if you don't want the kids. So abortion is a must, and it's a moral thing. It's a moral must and a legal must in a rational, free society. All right. Can the Fed bailing out the repo market collapse the economy? I don't see how in and of itself. I don't see how in and of itself. The repo market is the short-term market where I give you securities and I promise to buy them back from you in a day or two. Right? I repurchase them. And there's been a massive shortage in the repo market. There's been a massive shortage of cash, massive shortage of lenders in the repo market, and the Fed has come in and bailed out the repo market by providing massive amounts of liquidity into the repo market, providing, buying up this debt. Now, you could ask the question is, what led to the need of the Fed to intervene in the repo market? That could be the canary in the coal mine. That is, the fact that the repo market needs the Fed might suggest that there's trouble ahead for the economy. That's possible. And there's no question that whenever the Fed injects money into a market, it distorts the market. It distorts the price signals. It distorts incentives. And that might create problems in the economy as we move into the future. But the idea that them bailing out the repo market would cause the collapse of the economy, I don't see. It could cause a collapse to be worse. It could cause a recession to be worse because we're lacking the price signals that an independent repo market would have. Again, the repo market needing the help could be a canary in the coal mine that the economy is in bad shape. There are lots of things that could be going on. But in and of itself, the bailing out the repo market would not cause the collapse of the economy, although it will cause bad things, bad stuff. Whenever the Fed is injecting money somewhere, somehow, it's going to cause bad stuff. It's just a question of what, when, how, and how bad. Can you explain the U.S. debt bonds and how they work? Sure. I mean, U.S. debt bonds are just IOUs. So the government writes out IOUs. So it basically says, so the government says we need to fund our expenditures, and we're going to fund them by borrowing money. And Joe, would you like to lend me money? And Joe says, sure. Joe might be in China, but Joe says, sure, I'll lend the U.S. government money. So the government basically writes an IOU and says, I promise to pay Joe back, let's say $1 million in 10 years, and over that 10 years, I'll pay him an interest of, right now, I don't know, 2%. Right? And Joe gives the government $1 million, and the government gives Joe the IOU, and Joe gets the interest payments, that 2% regularly, and then in 10 years, the government pays Joe back the $1 million. That's what a government bond is. Now, U.S. debt is just all of those government bonds. Some of them are very short term, like 3 months. Some of them are long term, like 30-year bonds. But all of that, if you add up all of those bonds that the government has issued, that is what people talk about the U.S. debt being $23 trillion or something like that. And all of that needs to be paid, right? Now, the government can always pay these bonds back because the government has a printing press. The government has a printing press. So they just print money to pay it back. Or they tax you to pay it back. And they can raise your taxes to pay it back. So either way, the government will pay back its debt. But it can only do it by those two mechanisms. It can either tax you, therefore it needs to tax $23 trillion out of you, which is going to be hard to pay it back, or they can print it. Printing it generally creates inflation. It creates either a uniform rise in prices or bubbles, asset inflations. In any way, printing the money in order to pay back the debt creates other mega economic problems. So it's not free. It's not cheap to run up debt and pretend that you're never going to have to pay it back, which is what's happening today in the United States. What do you think of government school science curriculum? I wonder how scientific it is. I don't know that much about it. I mean, I know my science curriculum, which was pathetic and awful. I imagine the science curriculum in schools today is terrible. I mean, there's very little understanding of what the scientific method is. There's very little understanding on how science should be taught, the hierarchical view of science. There are people out there, objectivists out there, developing science curriculum that I think is significantly better. And the amazing thing is that schools are adopting this curriculum. So there's a company out of San Francisco whose name has just escaped my mind, which is actually developing curriculum in science, rational curriculum in science, and that curriculum is being adopted by thousands of schools. So there is a chance that science curriculum will get better. This is one of the really, really great, important things that objectivists can do, is they can start companies and sell curriculum. They could try to change the government schools from within. I think whatever limited success you can have there, it's worth doing. So if you can write history curriculum, if you can make history fun and correct and right, if you can write science curriculum, math curriculum, any of these things, then it's terrific. And in this case, they built a whole business and they make money and they've been incredibly successful in changing the way science is being taught in schools. And that's the beginning of a revolution. That's how long-term we will change the world. Because if you get science right in schools, then kids will graduate with A, a knowledge of science, but B, the capacity to think, the capacity to use reason, because that's what a science curriculum requires. It requires you to be able to use your mind, properly see the inductive method that's involved in science, properly see the integrations, the massive integrations that science involves. And imagine if you had generation after generation of kids graduating from schools. They didn't know anything, but they knew science, and they knew the scientific method, and they understood the scientific method. That is a game changer. That's the kind of stuff, much more important than politics. It's the kind of stuff that can truly change the world. I see there's a massive discussion about abortion going on the chat. Good luck with that. As I said, abortion should be legal until birth, and its morality depends on the motivation of the mother, and it depends on, like everything in life, how rational it is. But abortion generally is moral. The idea of particularly early abortions in the first 3, maybe in the first 6 months, is definitely moral, and abortions post 6 months, which are very rare, very, very rare, and only happen typically if the life of the mother is in danger, or if the fetus is really deformed. Those abortions are moral too, if the life's of the mother at risk, or the fetus is going to live a life of pain and suffering. Absolutely, I would say it's immoral not to abort in that case. It's not killing, because it's not a human being. It's killing, it's a living being, it's just not a human being. And it doesn't have rights. We kill all the time. The only thing that's banned, the only thing that's wrong, is killing another human being. And they're not a human being. They're not an individual yet. They're still a part of the mother. They're a part of her biology. Indeed, in the first 3 months, they're just a clump of cells. A clump of cells with the potential to be human. But they're not human yet. And until they become human, they have no rights. Until they become human, it's completely moral and legal to kill the fetus. Anyway. Have you ever heard the famous Chinese classical composition, the Yellow River Concerto? I'm confident you loved it. Also, Beethoven's Fifth or Ninth. Yeah, I like the Yellow River Concerto. I don't think it's as good as Beethoven's Fifth or Ninth, but I think it's good. I mean, I love Beethoven. I love all of Beethoven's symphonies, but particularly the third. I just heard the third recently at a concert. Magnificent, just fantastic. The dynamism, the tension, the drama, just the heroism reflected in it. Just a fantastic piece of composing. Beethoven's Fifth, Beethoven's Sixth, Beethoven's Seventh is maybe my favorite. And of course, Ninth is a masterpiece. But then I love his violin concertos, his piano concertos, his quartets, his trios, his piano sonatas, his violin sonatas, his everything Beethoven wrote, pretty much, is unbelievable and fantastic and life, inspiring. Now, Beethoven was pretty malevolent guy, and he saw a metaphysical need and struggle, and partially his deafness and his own struggles in life, and he was really a bridge between the classical and the romantic period, but also between feudalism in music and capitalism in music. Think about Beethoven. You won't hear this anywhere else. Beethoven is the first musician to actually live off of his music in a marketplace, have a market for his music. Not only did Beethoven organize concerts of his music, sell tickets, and get the revenue from those concerts, Beethoven also got to live in a period where pianos were part of the upper middle class. It was an expansion of pianos in the world, in Europe. As a consequence, there was demand for sheet music so that he could sell his music, not like Mozart and Haydn and Handel before that, and Bach, and who were completely and utterly lived under feudalism. They completely and utterly depended completely on feudal lords, on aristocrats, on the church to finance their music. Beethoven is the first one who could take advantage of the rising middle class, who could take advantage of the freedoms granted by capitalism, to be able to live off of his music without having to grovel before a pope or a cardinal or a duke or whatever the aristocrats were, or a king. He actually got to be a businessman. Not really a businessman. He hired businessmen, but he got to enjoy business. The fact that there was business that brought him income. But he was in this transition. There was still, early he was dependent on the aristocracy. It's still true that the aristocracy funded a lot of his success, but he saw the beginning of that transition. And he's a pivotal character in the history of music in that sense. He's not the first capitalist. He's the first capitalist in music. He's the first musician to benefit from capitalism. The first musician to benefit from capitalism. Look today. Today you can write a song, play it on YouTube, go viral, make money. You can do it directly. That's where we are today. All right, I'm confused as to why Ayn Rand wrote her protagonist as smokers in Atlas Shrugged. That doesn't seem very rational of them at all. Is it a metaphor? Well, you have to remember when the novel was written. The novel was written in 1957. In 1957, there wasn't scientific knowledge that suggested that smoking was bad for you. The assumption was smoking was enjoyable. Smoking was something that was cool, that was fun, that there was a joy in it. And people did it. People did it as part of living, and there was a certain romance to it. And if you see old movies from the 1940s and 50s, everybody smoked in those movies. So Ayn Rand was not unique in that everybody smoked in Atlas Shrugged. Everybody smoked. If you go back and watch Mad Men, right? Everybody's smoking in Mad Men. That's because everybody smoked in the 60s and the 50s. But it's also a kind of a metaphor that she describes, this man taming this flame and holding it in his hands. This idea of a flame, this idea of fire, this idea of man taming nature to his needs, to his pleasure, but using his mind. Cigarettes are a product of the mind. Using his mind to create something for his own pleasure by taming fire and holding it in his hand. Now, I hated smoking. I have smoked maybe 2 or 3 cigarettes in my life. I hated it when I first started. But even when I was growing up, smoking was like, yeah, okay, everybody smoked. My grandfather smoked. My parents did not. They didn't like it when they were growing up. But my grandfather smoked a lot. And his attitude towards it, was, yeah, it's probably unhealthy, but I like it, so be it. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a rational approach. Europeans even today smoke a lot. So, I think it's interesting that young people grow up today thinking that smoking is one of the most evil things possible. I don't think it's healthy. don't do it. There's probably a lot of things that are not healthy for you. Don't take drugs. Drugs are probably not healthy for you. Don't eat certain foods. They're not healthy for you. Smoking's not healthy for you. I don't do it because it's not healthy for me, and I never found it enjoyable. But in the 50s, people did find it very enjoyable, and people for 100 years found it very enjoyable, and they didn't know how dangerous it was. Some say ETs visiting Earth would be hostile. For beings to thrive long enough to develop interstellar travel, would they not have to be objectivists by default and therefore likely to want to cooperate and trade with us? I mean, I don't think they'd have to be objectivists by default, and it's hard to tell how objectivism would apply to a being with, let's say, different senses and maybe a different way of integrating reality. It's not to say that our way of integration, our way of processing information is the only way. But they would have to be rational in the sense that they would have to be fact-oriented, reality-oriented. They would have to be pro-science. They would have to be generally positive. So yes, so my view is that a species visiting Earth that had developed that kind of technology and that kind of wealth and that kind of prosperity would want to trade with human beings. Now, we would be these primitive intelligence. We would be way behind, but trade is win-win. And there's no benefit for them exterminating human beings. There's no benefit in them attacking. I mean, I find all these science fiction movies, stories where the alien shows up and they want to wipe out, they want to eat humans because they're so sophisticated. The human beings are the most nutritious thing they can imagine. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Instead of coming in wanting to communicate and wanting to trade and wanting to... So I like science fiction movies that have like a benevolent view of the aliens, that they want to communicate, they want to trade, they want to help us advance so we can trade at a higher level. It's like we should want people in poorer countries to advance so we can trade with them, so we can benefit from the win-win relationship. So yeah, the Abyss, again, the ending is awful, but the Abyss has a benevolent view of the movie, has a benevolent view of aliens. There was a recent movie where the aliens give you the power to see the future or the past or something like that. It kind of was silly in a certain dimension. But there was a positive view of the aliens, not as a threat, not as wiping out human beings. One of the reasons I don't like Independence Day is that they're so sophisticated. They build these jets. And they can't even beat us? That's nuts. If they really wanted to fight us. How do you see all this money the Fed is injecting? I mean, I've talked about that a little bit. I mean, I think all the money the Fed's injecting, it's injecting it in multiple ways and in multiple places. That's part of the complexity. In the repo market, I think it has negative effects. I don't know exactly what those effects are going to do. It's too complicated. I don't know. But I suspect that the effects are relatively small. And the injection into the bigger market, that is the QE, the quantitative easing, them buying mortgages, for example, has already have an impact. It's artificially lowered mortgage interest rates, and as a consequence, more people are getting into mortgages, more people are buying homes that shouldn't buy homes. But, homes are cheaper. It's also having an impact on interest rates generally. It's lowered longer term interest rates, which has allowed a lot of corporations that don't deserve to survive, should be wiped out. Should be wiped out, should go bankrupt. It's keeping them alive, so it's creating a zombie economy with zombie companies. It's doing all kinds of distorting things to the economy that we will pay for in the long run. Now, we could pay for that in a big, huge collapse, We could pay for that in just stagnation, in just really, really low economic growth like we have today. 2% growth, it could be 1% growth. I mean, every 1% growth is huge in terms of its impact on long-term human well-being, on standard of living, on quality of life. So the fact that we grow just at 1 or 2% is a disaster. It's terrible. It's horrible. All right. Let's see. Your shows will be negative. Are there any positive trends you're excited about? I did this talk about rational optimism, but the main trends that I'm excited about are technology, the disruptive nature of technology, the ability of technology to disrupt industries and to disrupt the way people view the world, the way people think about the world. Positive trends, are like this company that's producing curriculum for schools in science. There's another company I know run by Objectivists that is taking over the Montessori world. It's basically rolling up Montessori schools and creating a giant company that manages Montessori schools. And again, focusing on education, on early education. I think that's what we need to focus on. I see growing interest in Ayn Rand. I always see that. It's always there. It's growing, not as fast as I would want, but it's growing. It's not going away. Interest in Ayn Rand is not going away. And it's global now, which I think brings a whole new dimension to Objectivism. The fact that it's global, the fact that we now have we can tap in to the genius of people all over the world, not just to Americans, because now Objectivism is truly a global phenomenon. I don't see any positive trends in politics. I don't see any positive trends in the conventional mainstream ideological movements. I just don't, unfortunately, see that. And I see a lot of negative trends in business. It worries me that businesses are caving to the extent that they are. I still haven't done my show on stakeholder versus shareholders. I will, but the fact that the Business Roundtable abandoned shareholder wealth maximization and went with stakeholders, I think is a disaster. I'm seeing more and more objectivist intellectuals. I'm trying not to get negative. More objectivist intellectuals writing, doing, producing, creating, doing stuff. The fact that Dave Rubin is sympathetic and is willing to work with objectivists and trying to get the ideas out there. The fact that Gloria Alvarez is doing this. The fact that Ben Shapiro is willing to interview, the fact that there are people out there in the wider world more interested and more engaged with the ideas. Those are the positives that I see. But it's hard. I'll say it again. It's hard to be positive given the state of the world and given, maybe it's just me because of my lack of success on YouTube and really, growing exponentially and really getting to a point where I have a sense that, yes, I can really have an impact on the world. I can really have an impact on large numbers of people. I mean, if I was right now at 100,000 subscribers, I'd be much more optimistic about the world. At 17,000, it's very hard for me to be optimistic. I've been doing this a long time. I think the content is good. People tell me the content is good. But there's no interest. People are just not engaged. They'd much rather get content for Jordan Peterson, who I think is, to some extent, it's just not that innovative, not that new, not that interesting, not that, moving the world forward. Not really. In some senses, because of his religion, he's moving the world backwards. So it really is hard to be positive. I mean, my positivity is in my own life. I mean, I love my life. I have a great life. I think you can have a great life. I think you, as individuals, I think there's plenty to be positive about. Trends in the culture, I just don't see it. I've said maybe Brazil is on the right track. I don't know. There's a lot to prove yet. But all right, let's cap the Super Chat questions because, we've got a lot, and I've still got a lot to go through, and we're running, the show's been going on for now. The new broadcast has been going on for now, I don't know how long, but quite a long time. Somewhere there's a clock here that would tell me almost an hour. We've been going for almost an hour. All right, how would openly advocating for Ayn Rand's ideas affect someone's career in academia? Well, it would make it hard, particularly before you got tenure. But I think once you got tenure, I think if you did it right, I don't think it would have a huge impact. I mean, yeah, people would look at you funny, and people would be suspicious of you. But I think if you were good at what you did and you presented the ideas in a proper way, I think you would do fine. I mean, look at Tara Smith. I mean, it's a question of whether, you'd have to ask Greg Salamieri if his career was hurt in academia because everybody knew he was an objectivist. Now, of course, he did not have tenure. It's hard if people know you're an objectivist and you don't have tenure. But look at Brad Thompson. Everybody knows Brad Thompson's an objectivist, and he's done very well in academia, and he's very well respected. I think there are a lot of people in academia. Alan Godhelf, who was a philosopher, who was a Statilian philosopher, was well known as an objectivist, and was very well regarded because he did great work on Aristotle. I know business professors, Rajshri Agrawal, who is a tenured professor in business and strategy. People disagree with her. They know she's an objectivist, but she's done incredibly well. She's had job offers from Harvard University. So I don't think it has to hurt you. If you're good at what you do, first be good at what you do. First establish yourself, and then come out as an objectivist. What's your thoughts on Carl Sagan's show Cosmos, and what about his phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? I mean, I liked Carl Sagan's Cosmos. I mean, again, I saw it when it came out. I saw it in the 80s. I know, I'm that old. I saw it in the 80s. Let me just ask people again not to ask any more Super Chat questions. So I'll answer everything that's been asked, but please don't do it anymore. I watched it in the 80s and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I thought he showed this deep respect for science, this deep respect for reason, this deep respect for the history of science and the integrated nature of human knowledge. So on an epistemological level, he was fantastic. Now, once in a while, he went off, and he was clearly a lefty, and he was a big-time environmentalist, but I thought most of the show was fantastic. I haven't seen it in many, many years. I wonder if I think it was as good as I remember it. And then in terms of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. I think extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. I mean, I don't know what extraordinary evidence really means, right? It requires, the burden of proof is on you to prove so. If you make a positive claim, here's a new theory of X, or here's a new idea about Y, the burden of proof is on you, and if that claim is extraordinary, it challenges conventional wisdom and so many, then you've got to provide a lot of evidence. It's not going to be easy to convince people. You're going to have to go through it. You're going to have to put on a lot of work. People are asking questions in spite of my requesting not. Don't it depend how they deliver the criticism? Well, if they deliver the criticism in a way that's disrespectful, if they deliver the criticism in a way that's nasty, then just ignore them. I mean, again, somebody else's nastiness is their problem. Somebody else's ignorance is their problem. Somebody else's stupidity is their problem. Now, if they do it publicly in a forum in front of people, then yeah, you need to defend yourself, but there's no reason to go to their level. There's no reason to abandon reason. There's no reason to view it as diminishing you in any way. Their behavior is their problem. If they're saying falsehoods about you, then it's incumbent upon you to correct the falsehoods. But, you know, if somebody is nasty to you, it's going to be upsetting. I'm not saying don't feel the emotion you're going to feel. It's a question of what do you do about it? And mostly, there's not much you should do because it's on them. Do you have an objectivist interpretation of quantum mechanics? I know Picasso was critical of the uncertainty principle, and separating theory from evidence is difficult. I don't have. I'm not a physicist. I mean, it would be bizarre if I had a theory of quantum physics. I mean, it would just be weird. I don't know anything about physics. I studied physics in college. I don't know physics. I certainly don't know enough about quantum physics to have a theory. What I know is that the conventional explanation of quantum physics in the way that it is explained, I'm not even saying that it's explained right, cannot be true because it violates the law of identity. That's it. But there's no question in my mind that the quantum phenomena is a real phenomena, that what we observe is real. It's a question of how we explain it and how we understand it and how we integrate it. And I think there's a lot of work still to be done. Now, my understanding is that there are several explanations of quantum physics that are consistent with an objectivist view of metaphysics, that are consistent with the law of identity. I am in no position to say which one is right or which one is wrong. I'm in no position even to explain them because I don't know them. I just know that physicists tell me and philosophers of science tell me that there are explanations out there in the world by objectivists and by non-objectivists of the quantum phenomena that are consistent with the law of identity and the law of causality. That's all I have to say about quantum mechanics. I would like to actively defend objectivism in public debates like you do. Any tips on how to improve and get to that position? Well, first I would definitely go out and study objectivism. It's you got to study it a lot. And one of the best places to study it, other than studying it by yourself, is the Objectivist Academic Center. So get involved with the Objectivist Academic Center. They will also teach you how to communicate. So not just to know the ideas, but then how to also communicate the ideas and get better. And then it's just a matter of writing, thinking, writing, speaking, thinking, writing, speaking, thinking, writing, speaking, in that order. You've got to do a lot of it. And only after you've done a bunch of thinking, writing, speaking, do you go out and debate. And you only should debate things that you're an expert in, that you really, really know. Now, I happen to be unusual in that I am a generalist. I don't believe in generalists. There are very few good generalists. Most people need to specialize. Most people need to know something really, really, really well inside out as an expertise if you're going to debate. Now, even I, as a generalist, do not try to avoid issues, topics that I am not an expert in. For example, quantum mechanics. Now imagine me going up and debating quantum mechanics. I can't do it. There are a lot of issues I don't know enough to debate. So become an expert in something. Look at Alex Epstein, how he became an expert on energy and integrating energy with philosophy and then debating. But first, Alex had to do years and years and years of studying with people like Ankar, with people like Greg, of writing and getting the writing critiqued, of speaking, thinking, writing, speaking, studying, thinking, speaking, studying. All of that. You got to write. You got to think. You got to integrate. You got to study. You got to have good teachers. You got to go out and speak. And then you become a good debater. And you got to focus on what you want to be excellent in. Do you have any book recommendations on Pol Pot or Mao's China? Ooh, I'm going to keep this one so that I can look some stuff up for you. You guys ask me for book recommendations, but I can't. One of the things I can't do is hold names of books in my head like that. So let me get back to you on that. Why doesn't objectivism have a presence on TikTok, Snapchat, and other teen social media apps? Because, I don't know. Why doesn't it? I'll throw it back to you guys. You guys are young. I do YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. That's my limit. I'm challenged in that sense, right? Maybe in that sense, I'm limited. You guys are young. Why don't you have a presence on TikTok, Snapchat, and other teen social media apps? Go do it. I just can't do that many platforms. It's not in my character. It's not in my style. And this long format that I do is not suitable for TikTok and Snapchat. Those are very short format. But you can do it. You can do it. Just do it on Objective. Do it on what you know. Do it at the level you know. And it's short. Help me market the show to those people by going and doing short videos that basically send people to my show. How about that? All right. Opinions on Virginia's Second Amendment sanctuary counties. Well, I don't know what that means exactly. So these are counties in which they respect the Second Amendment. I mean, to a large extent, the details of the Second Amendment are left out to counties and states within the broad guidelines set forth by the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Second Amendment. At the end of the day, the federal government, if it believes that can pass laws, and if counties or states violate those laws, the federal government has the right and ability to enforce those laws at the county level. So it's just a matter of will the federal government do it? And I can understand why counties say, we think you're wrong about your understanding of the Second Amendment, but I think the appropriate way to do that, we live in a land of laws, is to challenge it in the Supreme Court rather than violate the laws on purpose in order to kind of stick it to the federal government and get the federal government to respond. Although, cities are doing that with immigration, and I'm guessing that you'll see more and more of that as in a sense, the Constitution becomes less and less relevant in our lives, in the functioning of our government. More and more local governments will take it upon themselves to determine what the law of the land should be and challenge the federal government and see if the federal government comes in and imposes itself on them. It's going to be interesting to watch. Not a good sign generally. It's, again, a disintegration of our country. Not a good thing when the country is disintegrated like it is today. Not a good thing that certain localities decide that they're not abiding by federal law, and that government employees say we're not abiding by the law and we're going to do our own thing, right? You saw that in some places that would not give out gay marriage licenses because they decided it was wrong. But the Supreme Court had ruled it was the law of the land. You're a government employee. Your job is to fulfill the law of the land. It's not good when localities start dissenting from the law of the land and having their own laws and kind of forcing the federal government to step in and potentially bring about kind of violent action. It's a sign of the times. The alt-right doesn't seem particularly religious. It seems like M2 will be some form of secular racial nationalism with Christianity playing on a minor support role as it did in Nazi Germany. I mean, maybe. It's hard to tell. The alt-right isn't religious, but that's why I think the alt-right is not going to succeed. The alt-right primarily is nihilistic, right? And that the pure racism, the racist that's not religious, I don't think is going to be that successful. Even the racism of the South was very much tied to religion, and there were always religious justifications for it. I mean, Christianity was deemed to be pro-slavery for many, many decades, according to the South, right? So I think in the end, my suspicion is that the ultimate M2 would be a racial nationalism grounded in Christianity. Whether the people who are at the top who practice it are secular or not, I think to get the masses, to get the numbers, to get the influence, it's like Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump has the evangelical vote, although there's a battle going on in the evangelical movement right now about whether they should give him the vote. But he has the evangelical vote, even though, and he panders to them, and he plays them, and he pretends to defend them in the name of religion, even though he's a complete secularist. He's not a religious bone in his body. He doesn't care one way or the other. So I think that's what's going to happen in the end, even though the alt-right, what's his name, Bronze Age Pervert, says he is an agnostic. An agnostic. But he's a nihilist. It doesn't matter. He can't win. He can't win. The integrators are the ones that win. And the only integration that has real force among the American people, among a significant numbers of the American people, is religion. If I see a woman being raped behind bushes and I don't call 911, doesn't that make me immoral? Yes, it does make you immoral. You're seeing something horrific happen. You're being unjust, which is a violation of the objectivist ethics. There's a bad guy there. It costs you nothing to call 911. That bad guy, that rapist, because he got away with the rape, might then rape your wife, rape your daughter, rape your best friend. You are sustaining his evil in the world. That evil will come and bite you. So absolutely, if you see evil being committed and you can do something about it, you must. You must. For the sake of your own life. It is a selfish act to fight evil. So if you see a crime like a rape being committed and you don't call 911, that is immoral. It is an injustice. It's not being selfish. It's being anti-self. Getting rid of evil is in your self-interest, deeply in your self-interest. If I see my neighbor torturing his dog and I call the police on him and they take him to jail, does that make me immoral? Well, if the laws of the land are that he goes to jail, then so be it. But I don't know. I don't think it makes you immoral. In a rational world, there wouldn't be laws against torturing dogs. I wouldn't want to speak to that neighbor. I wouldn't have anything to do with that neighbor. But the laws are what they are. And we live in a mixed world, and he's a horrible person. So I don't know. I don't think that would constitute immorality, given the nature of his action, which is immoral. I don't like using immoral laws, and I wouldn't do it. But thoughts on Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro. He's got very many positive traits. He has a certain respect for reason and enlightenment up to a point. That point is where his religion interferes. Once his religion interferes, faith is above reason. So at the end of the day, he places faith above reason. And therefore is an enemy of everything we hold dear. But he's mixed. He has this capacity to use reason to defeat some of our common enemies. He's very smart. He's very articulate. He often gives very good examples. He treated me with great respect and asked really good questions. Generally, I like Ben Shapiro, and I would probably vote for him for president because I think that he would, in spite of his religion, I think he believes, really, truly believes in the separation of church and state. Now, with the exception of abortion, of course. He truly believes in the separation of church and state, and as such, he would be could be a good president, with exception of what he would do to abortion. So, when it comes to president, I look at the political philosophy, and Ben Shapiro's political philosophy is, for the most part, very good. For the most part. Oh man, I see people upset by my claim. Animals don't have rights, so the government has no job in protecting them. I've said this on previous shows. Animals don't have rights. They're not conceptual beings. If you understand where rights come from, rights can only be applied to conceptual beings who need freedom, the freedom to think in order to survive. Dogs can survive without thinking. Therefore, they don't have rights. Animals don't have rights. Now, that means that politics has nothing to do with animals. Politics has no say in animals. Politics has no deal with animals. Now, torturing a dog is immoral. It's horrible. It's disgusting. It's abusive. It suggests that the person doing it is deeply lacks self-esteem and is probably a bad human being. And I would have nothing to do with that human being. I wouldn't sell him food in my grocery store. I wouldn't bake him a cake. I wouldn't talk to him. I wouldn't say hi to him. I wouldn't have any kind of relationship with him. But the government doesn't get involved. That's it. I mean, I know that today we can't separate morality from government, but you got to. You got to separate the two. They're not the same thing. All right. My kids are 6 and 7. A friend wanted to watch The Matrix with them. I refused, worried about the ideas. But I'm okay with most content regarded as inappropriate for kids. How to decide on content for kids? I just said torturing animals is not okay. It's evil. It's just not the job of government to deal with it. Okay. What do you do with... I don't know. I mean, this is a tricky one. Now, my view is that the worst thing you can... my view is there's too much violence in the world. There's too much violence in movies. There's too much violence in video games. Violence is romanticized. Violence is presented as something good and positive and noble and heroic and so on. And, I think that to me is more horrific. There are lots of bad ideas in movies, but I'm less worried about the nature of the bad ideas in movies in most movies. Like some of the Disney movies have kind of bad ideas, that a little altruistic, but I don't worry about them. I think kids can overcome them. I think kids can deal with them. I worried more about violence. Now, maybe my worries were misplaced, or maybe young kids can deal with violence. But I try to shield my kids from violence. Not sex, for example. I think I don't see any problem kids being exposed to, not pornography, obviously, but mild sex or nudity. Nudity doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I don't see why kids should be shielded from nudity or R-rated sex for the most part. Violence is what troubles me, and violence is what I keep them away. And then I think at 6 and 7 with The Matrix, it's so convoluted and complex, and the ideas are so bizarre and weird and nonsensical. It won't make any sense to them. It's not a movie that makes sense to show kids. The movies have to be on their conceptual level. That's a good, no gratuitous violence, and it has to be on their conceptual level. Just like you wouldn't let them read Fountainhead at 6 and 7. Now, The Matrix is not Fountainhead. It's not at that level, but it's complicated. It's hard to follow. And the philosophical ideas, as corrupt as they are tricky. Right? And the Matrix doesn't make sense. I mean, and for example, no Time travel movies make sense. I would show 6 to 7-year-olds time travel movies. So I think that's the way to think about it. Conceptually, does the movie make sense? I mean, I generally, for 6 and 7, some of the good Disney movies and old movies, lots of old movies, old comedies, old dramas, old movies from the 40s, 50s, black and white. They had content. They had fun. They had stories. They had heroes. Do you think you'll see a shift in the culture before you retire? Which means before I die, because I have no intention of retiring. I hope so. I mean, my hope is that within my lifetime, I will see a beginning of a shift. A beginning of a shift. That is, I hope that in my lifetime, I see a growing objectivist movement and a culture that starts respecting better art, a culture that starts pivoting towards individualism, a culture that starts pivoting to being more intellectual. I'd like to see in my lifetime some objectivists reach real prominence, whether in an intellectual field or in science or in business. I'd like to see many John Allisons. I'd like to see many people in academia reach prominence who are objectivists. And that's when I know it will happen, when objectivists have reached prominence in intellectual fields, in education, and in business. And when I start seeing better art and a better shift in the culture towards that art and towards individualism, away from tribalism, then I'll think it's the beginning of that cultural shift. Do I believe it'll happen in my lifetime? I do. And I hope I have a small part to play in it, in making it happen. But I'm still optimistic that it can happen. I also think I'm going to live long. And you guys are going to be the cause. You're the ones who are going to have to make it happen. And by the way for you to make it happen is to be good. To be good morally, to be good human beings, to be good people, to be good parents, to be good at work, to be good professionals, to be good business people, to be good academics, to be good or whatever it is that you do. Just be good. And then let people know that you're good because you're an objectivist, that good is defined in a particular way for you. So you will change the culture. And I'm hopeful that many of you who are listening to the show now, who might be in their 20s or 30s, I know about 30% of the people who watch the show between 25 and 35, I hope that you stick with it. Not with the show, but stick with the ideas. And I've seen too many people get attracted to the ideas when they're young. They get all excited. They're very passionate objectivists. And then at age 30, they give it all up, or they have a family, or they go get a job or whatever, and then they just become conventional. Stick with it. I'm hoping that my show helps you stick with it, helps you anchor to a time and a place and the ideas and reminds you of it. So I'm hoping that in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s, in your 60s, if you stick with it, then I think the culture will change. There are enough of us now that we will have a cultural impact. But we have to be good at what we do. You have to be good at what you do. You have to take the ideas seriously. And next week, I'll do a show on taking the ideas seriously and what that implies. What it implies for your individual life. And why, what the upside is for taking the ideas seriously. So we'll do that next week. All right, we've got some 40-year-olds, 45-year-olds, 74, 34, 23. All right, everybody's doing their age now. It's a nice spectrum, right? You know, I've looked at the YouTube. YouTube is almost all men. I mean, I know, there are a few of you here. I see Linda. I know Jennifer was on. I see Stephanie. There are a number of you who are, well, there we go. We get the ages. This is cool. So you're almost 90%, you're 95% men. The people who listen to the show, on YouTube at least, 95% men. And then, so it's like the women who are on right now are pretty much the only women who listen to the show. And then you are about 30%, 35 to 45, 20% 35 to 45, 18% under 25. 18 to 25. Very few under 18. I don't know if any. Oh, 19-year-old. Cool. We got a 19-year-old here. 2 19-year-olds. A 22-year-old, a 23-year-old. See, the future's you. Your generation is who needs to be on here. Stefan says he's 109. No. A cat is 109. Stefan's just asking about that. Yeah, I mean, this is great. 70. We've got 70-year-olds. That's a small number of my listeners are actually that age group, and they, that's where most of the women are. Unfortunately, I don't get a lot of young women watching the show. A lot of young men, not a lot of young women, right? So, we got a 16-year-old. Cool. All right. Not many of you. Not many 16-year-olds listen to the show, so this is great. 60-year-old. It's a wide variety. I'm curious. Another 16-year-old. Wow, that's great. How many of you, particularly the old-timers, how many of you, and this only applies obviously to a subsection of you. Okay, how many of you were objectivists 5 years ago? How many of you were objectivists 10 years ago? How many of you were objectivists 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? Give me the number of years you've been an objectivist, or you've considered yourself an objectivist. Or have been studying objectivism. You don't even have to call yourself an objectivist. How many of you have been studying objectivism? How many years have you been studying objectivism? Just put that number down. Let's see from the chat. 1 year ago. 21 years ago. 3 years ago. Since 1982. 2 years. 2 years. 4 years. This guy was an objectivist for 4 years. I guess he's not now. 38 years, 20 years, 30 years, 45. 1 year, 4 years. 6 months. Ken, I don't know if you're really, I don't know. 3 to 4. 14. 1.5. Less than 1. 10. I like this. This is great. All right. 2, 22, 20. This is great. This is great. A nice, diverse group here. 12. So we've got complete newbies, a bunch of complete newbies. And then we've got people who've been studying objectivism for 20, 30, 40 years. And then we've got a bunch of people like in the middle, like 5 to 20 years. And that's great. That's exciting. This year was it's scary to say, was my 40th year. No, 42nd year. I first read Atlas Shrugged. in 1977. And I was 16 years old. And that's when I first read Atlas Shrugged. And it was, yeah. And the rest, as they say, is history. All right. This has been fun. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for participating. Thank you for providing all this information. It's kind of cool to see. It's nice to see kind of the range of people. And this is just the live people. The range of people listening to the show, live at least. But it's nice. It's a nice spectrum from 74 all the way to 16. People who've been studying it for 40, 50 years to people who are just doing it for less than 6 months. Great. See you all on the 31st. We'll be talking on the 31st. Have a great weekend. I'll have an opportunity then to wish you a New Year's. But if I don't talk to you before New Year because you are not listening then have a great New Year. I mean, 2020 should be fantastic. We're going to do great things on the show. We're going to have a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of interest. I'm going to make a lot of money. That's my goal for 2020, make a lot of money. And we're going to do big things. We're going to change the world together. And you've just by giving me all this info and participating so much, you have made me far more optimistic than when I started this show. All right, everybody, have a great night. Sorry for the false start and a different show, but we survived. Bye, everybody.